Are we going to mention the European Super League? We're about the only people who won't, probably.
The European Super League. And here is the European Super League, or whatever Eddie Hemmings said.
What happened to our European Super League?
People are going to be upset, aren't they? Because the company's called Super League Brackets Europe and not European Super League. So, as if Rugby League came up with the name Super League in the first place anyway, which we didn't.
There's our USP gone overnight.
I know.
Which wasn't unique anyway.
Yeah. Along with netball, women's football, darts leagues across the country, everything. Rugby World Cup. That was ours. Video referees, taking that. I even saw Brian Moore, famous Halifax solicitor, don't know what else he ever did, suggesting that Rugby could perhaps play the pro games in the summer. What a novel idea.
I've heard of that before.
Only 20 years behind, but I don't know. Yes, the European Super League, it's happening. It's happening. It's not happening. It'll get cancelled somehow. Who would give power to sports clubs? John Davidson. I mean, what a crazy idea that would be. Can you imagine the chaos that would happen if you let loose these egos of club owners, 12 of them, and handed the future of the sport in their hands?
I did read a whimsical piece by a certain follically challenged Ross Heppenstall today about that and how it was similar to Super League. The breakaway of 96. It's not really, to be honest. I don't think you can compare it that much at all because they want to essentially create their own Champions League and still play in the normal leagues. It's not really that different, but it just sort of shows professional sport at that level is just all about money and greed. And also, I think, is there any, Phil might be able to answer this, is there any foreign owners in Super League, in Rugby League in the UK? I don't think there is, while pretty much nearly every English football club is now owned by an American or a Russian or whoever.
I think there was a bloke called Argyle who owned a foreign team in Rugby League, but I don't think he's involved anymore.
But we like Australians, I feel, don't. Well, some of us do. Some of us don't, but...
It's really interesting what Richard said, though. I mean, it's not even so much about this being a surprise. It's about governance models and the rich wanting and needing to become richer, and the poor being told either follow in our wake or go and do your own thing. Well, if you look at the history of the Northern Union and why it broke away from the establishment RFU in 1895, there are even some parallels there. So you let the genie out the bottle, you shouldn't be surprised that it goes to its illogical extension. That there are voracious beasts out there that are looking for global markets and sponsors in India that will pay the wages of overinflated wages that can't be contained, and that's what you get. Let's not talk about it anyway. But
who are the Australian equivalent of Spurs anyway? That's what I want to know.
Manly, definitely.
Oh,
so a team that hasn't won a comp since 1961, who think they're a big club but they're not really a big club.
Manly.
No, we won a comp in 2011. Phil, so
yeah, but Manly promise much, deliver little.
Well, we're the only team to have won a grand final in every decade and never won the wooden spoon, but I would probably say I would have almost said Cronulla, but I don't think they've ever pretended to be a big club. Probably West Tigers in some way.
Well, I mean that neatly links us.
Bulldogs. Or the
Bulldogs.
They're particularly rubbish. But they used to be good in the 80s and a little bit in the 90s and the 2000s. Yeah.
And the other thing to say about all of this is some of the words being used by those who want to break away and those who want to retain what there is, bearing in mind that what there is isn't particularly equitable in the first place. There is so much have and have not in football already that to be claiming that it's going to be any different is a little bit of a misnomer. But words like sustainable footing, headline fixtures,
Stakeholders was my favourite.
change because of the coronavirus, all the kind of things we should have been looking at for our game and haven't.
I think that probably the only interesting correlation is fan power and what power fans have. And obviously, when Maurice Lindsay wanted to, merge certain teams, Calder and what was it, Widnes and Warrington, fans were against that, and they demonstrated, didn't they? And they effectively stopped it happening. And the same happened in Australia. South Sydney got kicked out of competition, and 100,000 people marched through the main streets of Sydney. Not all of them South fans, some of them North fans, Balmain fans, etc. And they got the club reinstated. And there was a very vocal fan element to the ARL v Super League war, which effectively kept some of the ARL clubs going to nights, for example. So, yeah, fans do have a say, like in the European Super League. If people don't watch it, don't pay their money, then, it'll be a failure. It won't happen. So I think fans, as always, they can vote with their feet, with their consumption habits, with their wallets.
But again, it raises a really interesting question about, are there enough traditional fans, or the horrible phrase that the ESL are using, legacy fans, compared to the global fans they can attract? And that's also at the heart of the debate, that we have got an ageing fan base. Will it sustain the sport going into the next 10, 15, 20 years?
I agree, Phil, and there definitely needs to be a push for younger fans and younger people to get involved in rugby league. When I think I went to Anfield about 4 or 5 years ago, they were playing Arsenal, and it was probably at least 12 years since I'd been to a Liverpool FC game at Anfield. And what struck me was the amount of Germans, Japanese, etc. people, fans who were at Anfield, with obviously no connection to the city, or they were fans of the club. Which obviously in rugby league we don't have that problem, which would be a nice problem to have, but we don't have millions of people in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia watching our games, at 9 o'clock at night or 3 in the morning. So that is the massive difference, isn't it? Football, the Premier League especially, lives off global TV rights and making money from Asia and Africa and the Middle East and America, and that's what's driving these things, I think.
I think there's two issues raised there. One is the idea of this would not be going ahead, however abhorrent it might be, if there wasn't finances and television backing it. Now, it may not be the traditional television here. It might be someone in America. It might be someone in the Far East. But the amount of money that is on offer is what is driving this. We are looking at a television deal which apparently should again have been announced last Friday and wasn't, that is going to be less rather than more. So that again is why there is no comparison with what's happening. But I think the other thing is there's a lot of talk of corporate finance in sport these days. Be it the All Blacks, be it, the Formula One, whatever it might be. You invite in corporate finance, and in some ways it's impossible to stop it when you've opened that door in the first place. And they will tell you what they want. You will not be telling them what you are prepared to be. And this, again, is a slippery slope of saying, yes, we need the money from outside to keep us going. What price are we going to have to pay to get that money? And that's what football are finding. Rugby union will be finding. Cricket is certainly finding. The fan objections to the 100 have not stopped it going ahead. It's a televised, financed version of cricket that we are going to get whether we like it or not, and people will go and support it.
The flip side of that is, though, in the modern world, in a more competitive sports market, can you survive without private investment, private ownership? Because, the All Blacks are one of the most successful brands/teams of any sport anywhere in the world, but that's a tiny market. They are a tiny market, a tiny country, and they realise that they're going to stay where they are. They need extra money, and obviously in rugby league, if we're not growing, we're either stagnating or we're going backwards. And I think a lot of people would say we are going backwards. So at least in this part of the world. So if we don't accept private ownership or private investment, how do we move forward? How do we improve? But
the other side of that coin is there will be a price to pay for the money that comes in. You will lose some of and alienate some of what you might call traditional, but that door was opened in 1895, and certainly as far as football, the Premiership is built on exactly the same model of breakaways for television money, and the big clubs looking for more say, and the other ones being given an ultimatum: you either follow us or you never play us again, which they have to do. And we had the same in here and in Australia with the formation of Super League. This is just advanced capitalism in sport.
Where's Rupert Murdoch? He must be around somewhere. He's always around. He's always around. It's the bizarre thing about sport, and we will talk about rugby league properly in a second, that the country that is most scared of socialism stroke capitalism is is North America, is the United States of America, and theirs are the sports that have the most salary capped systems, etc. But there you go. We'll see what happens, and
it raises the question of franchising and promotion and relegation as well, which we're not here to discuss football, but all of the issues that football is facing, and bearing in mind the global profile that football has, are all things that we should be discussing, because whether we like it or not, it may at some point, not too far down the line, affect this sport if it is to gain the kind of prominence that it will need to survive in a full-time environment.
Well, I think Rich makes a good point. I think if there was salary caps in the Premier League or in world football, then we wouldn't have this scenario, because we wouldn't have ridiculous spending that's out. And I think, the Americans with their drafts and their salary caps, I think there's an argument, can a salary cap league work if you don't have a draft? And some would say it doesn't. It's certainly a system, I think, that is more equitable, but doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get. You're still going to have big clubs and small clubs. I think that's just life. Unless Wakefield get the best 3 picks every year, so they get Jake Truman, Morgan Smithies, and Harry Smith. Which, as I see Rich nodding, I think he's up for that.
Yeah, we'll just sell them. We'll just sell them on. We'll sell the picks on.
Or you get to keep Gareth Ellis and Keith Mason. That would be helpful.
Can I keep one of those? Sell the other one.
Keith. Keep Keith.
The excitement. Before we get onto this news, because somebody's mentioned this, I do like how 4020 magazine throws out a bone to the reader. A radical restructuring plan, Phil, that 4020 magazine, the actual paper, bits of paper, knows about, sentient paper. What's going on? What's happening?
I think we'll probably hear more about it in a couple of weeks, but it's safe to say that there has been a plan drawn up for how rugby league could look that has attracted the relevant level of corporate investment to fund such a plan. And it's a plan that is from top to bottom. It's not aimed solely at elite clubs. But the clubs themselves are not being responsive to the plan, because they haven't decided amongst themselves what they want any plan to look like.
Right, that's good then, isn't it? So yeah, nothing changes. Nothing changes.
But actually, within that plan is everything we've just been talking about for the last 15 minutes, and why it is important that what is happening in the world of corporate finance in soccer does have spillovers at some point to rugby league. We either want to address what those issues might be going forward, or we want to hide away from them and then become something less than what we currently are.
In other news, on the pitch, excitement as no one can believe that Jackson Hastings is going to the NRL and he's off to sign for the West Tigers, John. I mean, we're all shocked about this dramatic development.
Yeah, I saw, I think it was a tweet by someone, he finally gets his crack in the NRL. Pretty sure he's already played for 2 clubs in the NRL, and the only reason he's in Super League is because he got kicked out of those 2 clubs and no one else would have him. So either some people are bad at their jobs or they've got very short memories. Yes, no surprise whatsoever. I think what's interesting in it is that he, apart from his mum slagging off Josh Hodgson on Twitter, which is an interesting strategy. Is he's going to the West Tigers, who are a team coached by Michael Maguire, who is a particularly intense and demanding coach. And in fairness to Jackson, on his previous experiences, you would say he's a difficult character, or at least a difficult ego to manage. So you would not necessarily say that that's probably the best fit. But look, I don't think anyone who's seen him play can doubt his talent. He's one of the best players in the Super League. And I think they made a really good point on Sky after the Leeds game. How many, Phil will know, how many players were named in Sean Wayne's ridiculously early England squad? 400.
38 or 39 in the end.
And 4 were added, don't forget.
Yeah. 4 were added, and he didn't. Apparently, he's not among the best 42 or whatever.
I mean, without wanting to ape another member of our panel who hasn't been here for a while, he's not English. He's not from England.
No, but just on that, Rich, someone actually, a prominent figure of the league mentioned this to me on the weekend. He's obviously not born in England. He was born in Wollongong, I think. But where was Cruz Leeming born?
You see, hang on, you see. There's different types, right? Swaziland, that's Commonwealth. That's us. Poland. World War II, that's us. We saved. But, that's Australia, nothing to do with us. No.
Even if you've got English grandparents, it's obviously nothing to. So
unless you're good, unless you're really, really good.
Yeah. So I think that's one to watch because Sean Wayne seems pretty intent on not picking anyone who might not have a non-Yorkshire, Lancashire accent. So, Dan Sargentson was another one. He was born in Perth. He's in the squad. So there you go. Perth in WA, not Perth in Scotland.
Yeah. Be very interesting to see if Jackson Hastings is picked for the Combined Nations All-Stars to play against England. I certainly would pick him because the more people you can get to play against England who have a specific point to prove, the more closer to an intense game it's going to be. On Hastings, I think the good thing for Wigan is they've got him for this year. It's settled. He's definitely here. I mean, there were rumours before the season started that he may not even have come back.
I don't think there was any talk like that was never going to happen. I think he was always coming back. I think his grandfather's not particularly well, and I think that was part of the reason why he was staying back. But I think the deal with the West Tigers for next year has been in the works for some time. Obviously, they've been shedding players. Benji Marshall, Josh Reynolds, who's obviously now at Hull FC. There's a big doubt over Luke Brooks. So, I think they're just recovering from that ridiculous ending of the game on Saturday where Burgess, an Englishman, scored a very important try.
But as you say, it's no great surprise that he's off back to the NRL and no surprise he's leaving Wigan at the end of his 2-year deal, as everyone suspected would have happened anyway. So people get upset about these things for no apparent reason.
I think the other thing is that Harry Smith signed a 4-year deal the day before, and it's not as if Wigan haven't got a replacement who they absolutely need to give game time to. And the way the timing was done, it was clear that Wigan were getting that in first, as if to say, don't get too upset about Hastings going. This is now the opportunity for Harry. I think everybody comes out of it really well.
That's exactly it, Phil. I mean, they've got a ready-made replacement in there. There's no point having an academy and bringing through players and not giving them the opportunity to play. And Harry Smith's an England academy international. I think he's been at the club since he was 14. Very good player. He might be the next George Williams, in a couple of years. So give him a chance to play. And obviously, Jai Field will be fully healed and back on the field, pardon the pun, next year. So I'm sure Wigan will be fine.
If either of you get the opportunity in the next few days to speak to Sean Wayne, do ask him if he fancies playing against Jackson Hastings in the Combined Nations thing. And what was else I was going to ask Sean Wayne? Oh, yeah, if he's going to get Jose Mourinho involved. We know he's talking to John Terry. But Jose Mourinho's doing nothing now. He could come and have a chat with the England squad and, G him up for the World Cup. Hide in some laundry somewhere.
I want to see Tim Sheens pick Blake Austin on the wing. I think that's the selection that everyone's hanging out for. But hopefully Blake's had some field goal practice this week after the shocker on Sunday.
Golden Point. Someone wanted it scrapped too, but I think it was Kev who's asked some great questions like, "Why don't we see dogs on the pitch anymore?" But why oh why? Every time we come to Headingley, there's a dog on the pitch. I remember someone used to sell T-shirts with Ray French quotes on. They should bring those back. Golden Point. We've had it twice this week, and no one can kick drop goals. Twice in this hemisphere, I should say. No one can kick drop goals. But you're still a fan, John. You like the concept. You don't want it scrapped.
I think Sunday was weird because it was set up for Mark Sneed, who's an unbelievable drop goal kicker, and he missed 3 of them. I think he just had an off day. A couple of the other attempts were completely woeful, and the whole KR Castle game, which I was also at, it looked like no one had practiced them either. But then, you see what Adam Reynolds does, and he kicks them for fun. Daly Cherry Evans. So in the games that I've seen, there's more exciting, interesting Golden Point games than double draws with 9 missed drop goal attempts. I think that's the exception to the rule rather than the norm. But yeah, I guess it happens. Not every Golden Point can be 10 out of 10. If you use the example on Friday night, which was Hull KR Huddersfield, which was an absolutely crazy, dramatic game, I think that going to Golden Point would have been, great, as long as the video ref wasn't involved for another time.
Well, what do you think, Phil? Should we get rid of it? We've only just brought it in, so let's get rid of it straight away. That's what we do.
No, I think we've discussed this before. Sport is about winning and losing inherently, and all of this talk of, it becomes a drop goal-a-thon. If we had draws still, I seem to remember a lot of games where in the last 5 or 6 minutes of normal time, it became a drop goal-a-thon, and nothing's changed other than the fact that you get the chance to win the match. And the West-South game was classic, wasn't it? Because it went to Golden Point extra time, but it was a try that won it. You don't have to keep doing drop goals if you don't want to. And so many exponents we've seen over here. Danny Richardson should be a prime candidate for being able to drop a goal, and the people that have missed them with great regularity over the last couple of weeks are the ones you would actually put money on to drop them. So that's part of the excitement, isn't it? No, I don't have a problem with it. I never did. I know there is a school out there that doesn't like it, but I have no problem with Golden Point.
Is that? Oh, sorry.
Was the famous Brad Dwyer David Furner one? Was that probably the ugliest drop goal of all time? Was that Golden Point, or was that just at the end of the game? I think it was Golden Point.
Golden Point, yeah.
Yeah, that was great drama. And you mentioned the Burgess one on Saturday. The only reason he scored was because the 2 West defenders shot off the line to close down Adam Reynolds. Damien Cook saw that, but the short ball to Burgess, huge hole, which he ran through, and he's obviously a big man and hard to stop, and managed to get around the fullback and score, probably the best try of his career. I couldn't agree more, Phil.
But is that the problem, though, that teams are just setting up for drop goals all the time, not trying something different? Maybe if they tried to run at the defence or put the again, I was going in my head, put a little chip over the top and try something different. it might be more, to people's liking. I don't know. It's
we want stories. We want drama. We get it with Golden Point, so I don't have a problem with it. But I know a lot of people do.
Well, draws do mess up the league table as well, which is funny.
What was it, 6 years ago? Jonathan Thurston, Golden Point, extra time in the grand final, wins the game. I mean, what do we do there? Do we just say, well, let's have a replay, another grand final a week later? Yeah. It's not 1937.
Is there still a replay for the Challenge Cup? Because it never happens. Obviously, it hasn't happened since 1982, but it's going to be at Bramall Lane or something. It's going to be at Bramall Lane, and then it never is. So, apologies to all the people in Sheffield, though.
There's not going to be any Premier League football at Bramall Lane.
I don't know. I've got a reprieve here. This is the exciting thing. Ross Heppenstall, your mate, has just tweeted a video of Leeds and Liverpool fans marching around Ellen Road. Socially distanced as well, which is good of them. Maybe they can go there for the World Cup games in the autumn.
He's a Liverpool fan, so hopefully he can give himself a few uppercuts as he's covering that game.
Throw something at a post. at least next time you want to go to Anfield, John, you'll be able to get it because all the season ticket holders have given their tickets back, so you'll be able to get a ticket.
Well,
You have to.
Because it was a free ticket from a friend who's a Liverpool fan. I wouldn't pay to see Liverpool. That's for sure.
Even better. Si, before we get on to more of actual games, who's going to be the Cats coach next year?
Well, that's a really interesting one because the rumours last week, until I read League Express last night, I thought Lee Radford was the favourite. Apparently, he interviewed really well, and you can't see with COVID the effect going to America that he was planning to do. But according to League Express, it's not him. And as I understand it, I think James Ford is committed to York and will probably sign a new contract extension in a couple of weeks or soon. That's certainly the mail I have. So if it's not James Ford and it's not Lee Radford, you would think it's going to be Andrew Henderson, but you never know that part of Wakefield, do you, Rich?
Andrew Henderson or Danny Ward.
A big hello to any...
The only problem with Lee Radford would have been managing his relationship with Liam Watts, who is such a key part of Castleford's makeup at the moment and playing really, really well again. How would they have sat face to face across the desk going, so you threw me out a hole, you didn't think I was good enough, you think I've got an attitude problem, now you want me to play for you at Castleford?
What do you see, Phil? What's your take if Peter Matauti goes to Warrington as expected and Jake Truman is sold to Warrington as they seem to be wanting Warrington to sign him up? Do you think that's a concern with the Warrington coach in waiting, sort of effectively picking the carcass of his current club, or do you think that's...
I think it would be a concern for either Blake Austin or Gareth Widdup, because that is already telling us that one or other of those isn't going to be there next.
I think likely both want to go back to Australia. I don't know that for a fact, but I think that's most likely, I would imagine.
So the money that Warrington will be saving on those two contracts makes them players in the market for the likes of Truman. And as we've said, COVID is such that, unfortunately, everyone will have a price more than ever before. But then that comes down to whoever is coming in at Castleford, because I think there's about 8 players off contract there. So they need to make a decision really soon and start engaging with who the new guy is about who he wants. And it may well be that if the Castleford board say, look, we wouldn't otherwise have had any money, but by selling on these 2 players, you have got £300,000, which in the current market is a lot to spend, but you can get 4 or 5 players of your type and the way you want to play, then I think it sort of works. It isn't great for Castleford. You don't really want to produce players to sell them on if you don't have to, but this goes back to everything we were talking about in football. There's so many clubs that now survive by generating talent and selling it on at a profit and then rebuilding their own side on the back of that. So that's probably where Castleford are in the market at the moment.
£200,000 is a lot of money in rugby league it's a lot of money in rugby league in 1993 or whatever, let alone 2021, but obviously, Castleford rate Jake Truman higher than that, or certainly his value is higher to them. More questions. Lee Gaskell, is he okay? I mean, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about his sudden fall on the pitch on Friday night. Was he dazzled by the lights at the Craven Park, whatever it's called these days, stadium? All those new seats at the end. They've done a good job of improving the ground there at Rovers. What happened? What's happening? Should he be charged by the Rugby Football League, which he hasn't been, for bringing the game into disrepute?
I don't. Yeah, I think charging players for diving is a difficult one, slippery slope. But he was definitely auditioning for a part in a West End musical. That was for me. And I think Rod Studd, a good friend, tweeted me and other people mentioned obviously the hands from Kenny Dalby's neck, but it just seemed so obvious that he missed. We either decided not to catch the ball or just, I'll let this bounce. Oh no, it's bounced badly. I better fall over because they're going to score here. It was just a colossal brain explosion, much like the opening try, which you feel bad for Sam Wood, and I think it might have been Jack Cogger who kind of sort of just waved him in. But yeah, that was quite bad. I mean, I think at least there's some karma that Hull KR won that game, because I think if they'd lost that game with those decisions and the Chris McQueen knock on, there would have been a lot of power coming out of Craven Park.
The Chris McQueen knock on that wasn't. I think it went backwards. The thing about Lee Gaskill.
Even Chris McQueen, you could see him just go, "Ooh, I got away with that." Yeah.
I think the thing with Gaskill is the ridicule that he's taken from everybody within the sport is punishment enough. I don't think you could ever prove that he deliberately dived. It clearly looked like he grossly exaggerated the fact that he could feel a hand on his shoulder and that he had misjudged where the ball was going to bounce. It must be the low sun coming off the top of the roofs of the static caravans just going out to sea there. I think going into the dressing room on Monday morning, he would have taken enough stick rather than the disciplinary panel. So I can't see either him or too many other rugby league players doing that again in the near future. It's not suddenly become an epidemic in the sport.
The funny thing was, though, after that moment, he had an absolute blinder. I mean, what did he set up tries and scored a try? If he hadn't come off the bench and played as well as he did, they would have been flogged by about 30 points. So it was a really kind of odd, bizarre game in general, and particularly from him as well.
Odd, bizarre, but entertaining at the same time. Excuse me. The quality was terrible to an extent, but it's still, you couldn't take your eyes off it because you didn't know what was going to happen next. No one could catch the ball. It was just utterly bizarre to watch.
It was. I thought it was fantastic entertainment, and it looked like, again, Hull KR had won a game twice and lost it twice, and you thought they were going to lose it right at the end. But it was fantastic entertainment, and I thought the Sky team, the commentary team did a really good job with it. I think John Wells was pretty strong in his comments, which was good, and so was Phil Clark. I think he called it a disgrace. And that's what you want. That's why you've got a panel of commentators. You want to get different views and you want talking points. There's a shame Tony Smith sat on the fence with against the video referee, and we didn't hear from Ian Watson, which is a shame too, because Huddersfield, they're struggling a bit. Quite surprised that they haven't won a game yet. Well, they're 3-0 in Super League, and obviously they beat Lee in the Challenge Cup, but Lee's probably not the toughest opposition at the moment.
Just going back to Phil Clark, was he auditioning for a remake of Randall and Hopkirk Deceased?
I don't know what that is, Phil, but I presume it involves bad fashion.
One for the teenagers there.
I think John Wells was interesting on commentary, because obviously we're used to him being next to his big telly and explaining things to us. But he was very forthright in his opinions, whether right or wrong, whether you agreed with him or not. It was a different John Wells. It was a freer John Wells. It was it was interesting. Almost
as if that was his main job now.
Yeah, I should apply for the job of director of rugby at Cass. I don't know how you qualify for that job or not, but I don't know. So there you go. We talked about a game, Huddersfield and Hull KR.
I think the thing about that is, if Hull KR hadn't won that, I don't know where their season would have gone, because there are only so many really narrow defeats that you can take before it does start to affect confidence, no matter how experienced your players are. That was a really important victory for them, I think. Huddersfield were always going to take a little bit of time, as Salford were, because they've got a new coach with a different philosophy and quite a few different players in there. And they played a couple of weeks without Aidan Caesar, and he clearly didn't look in the first half as if he was fully fit, that he may have been brought back a little bit earlier to stop the slide in form. I don't have too many worries about Huddersfield because I think they've got the quality of player there that it will work for them. Be a little bit more worried about Salford and the way they played at Catalan on Saturday. They look like they could be in for a longer season. But no, you mentioned quality. How do you define quality? Because I think you're right. You know, there are a lot of people on Thursday night with the Leeds Wigan game saying it was low quality because it was forward dominated, as it was always going to be with so many forwards on the field. But actually, in terms of not being able to take your eyes off it, and an intensity and a speed and the ball in play for the absolute majority of the time, it was captivating stuff. If you say, no, it's not the same as the NRL, you're not comparing like with like.
Just on that, Phil, Hull KR play Leeds this week, so Leeds are in crisis, so Hull KR will be fine. Easy win for them. In terms of quality.
Get the T-shirt out.
Yeah, I don't think, I thought Thursday's game was pretty ordinary, but I mean, credit to Leeds because they're absolutely gutted by injury, and you could see the effort was there. And I think probably more is the issue, like, why is Wigan starting so poorly in games? They started poorly against Leigh. They started very poorly against Leeds. Who else have they played?
Wakefield.
Yeah, I think were Wakefield ahead early there? Rich might know.
Yeah, I think it was level at half time, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously, their second halves are great and they're winning the games. That's the main thing. But you would think it's a bit of a concern that you're going 8-0, 18-0, etc. behind early. Obviously, they're not at full strength, but they've still got, you know, probably 80% of their top choice squad. So, I don't think it was a fantastic game on Thursday. There were moments of brilliance. I think the Zach Hardacre try, the solo try, the chip over the top, that was brilliant. I think Kyle Eastman...
Scully was off his seat.
Well,
he doesn't like Wigan, but when Hardacre you can imagine him, can't you, jumping off his settee.
Is that because he can't see where the seat is, or is that...
bit harsh.
Vision and awareness.
I think that the Kyle Eastman, you know, the pass out the back was good, but the story for me was Kyle Eastman, and you know, I think 13 tackles, no carries, no meters, a handful of kicks, kind of. Reece Martin in the halves with him kind of shows where Leeds are at, but it was the courage that they showed, and which they did against St Helens. You know, by all accounts, they should have been beaten by 40 points by St Helens, but there is a lot of character and heart in that Leeds team, and I think Richard Agar is doing a really good job at getting them up to compete when they are, you know, what do they feel? Third choice spine, fourth choice spine? I mean,
I think they're down to, it's not the amount of injuries. Every club has injuries at the moment. It's the positions that the injuries are in and the multiple injuries in the same position. So when you do have to play two forwards in your halves in the cup tie, and then somebody makes his debut against a second rower, with a second rower as his partner, so all the onus is thrown on him, which is probably why he didn't run with the ball much in the first half. They've got to adapt. I think there's 3 or 4 possibly due back this week, so we'll have to see. But I just don't get why a lot of people are tweeting, you know, we'll never match the NRL for quality and standard, because we're not at that level, and we never will. If you want to get to that level of intensity and quality of player across the teams, there has to be a revision of a radical plan to change the sport. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, no one. Yeah, I think Rich might have mentioned this. No one in Australia who watches the A-League, which is the football competition in Australia, goes, "Oh, we've not matched Man City v Liverpool, you know, Sydney FC v Melbourne Victory," because they're light years apart. I mean, that's just, I couldn't agree more, Phil. Yeah, because there still can be a quality game with drama and talk.
Absolutely.
Doesn't have to be, you know, the same quality in terms of salary cap or player wages. You have to enjoy a contest on its merits, I think.
But it's also pretending that every game in the NRL is a 1-point classic, and that's not true either. You know, it's
especially this year.
No. I mean, Phil's a Broncos supporter, so you know he knows he's used to his team being absolutely massacred every week, which is really tough to see. But no, Rich, you're 100% right. You get good games and bad games in every league and every competition. And I know there's been some talk about a big gap developing, you know, but there's gaps developing in every season and every competition. We're only 3 rounds in, so last year were their team won a game after 3 rounds? I'm sure there were. And there's a lot of talk about Leigh. who were obviously, obliterated by Castleford. But when you look at the central distribution issue and the fact that they only got admitted mid-December, is anyone surprised that Lee's struggling? I mean, a team that's recruiting 2 weeks into the season, I think they've signed 3 or 4 players in the past 3 weeks. That is a big indicator that,
And with the greatest respect to him, I'm not sure quite what the question is if Anthony Gelling's the answer.
Yeah, but if you say he's overrated as a player, as I've done before, people won't go at you.
No,
because
all I said, I mean, he is the best that they can get at the moment, and I think that tells you where they are in terms of delayed recruitment.
Oh, sorry. What I said was his social media is overrated, not his playing ability, because I can't really comment on that. Speaking of Leeds and Wigan, more from Kev. The kits. What was that all about? What's going on there? Purple versus mainly blue with a bit of white on the front, but blue on the back.
Phil was there. Wigan, I think. Phil.
To be honest, one of the bizarre things is that in live, it didn't look like a colour clash, but clearly within minutes of the game starting, there was a lot of social media saying that it was. It's all about selling merchandise, isn't it? That's all it is.
It is in the Super League Code of Conduct, so it was last year, because I had access to it last year and I don't this year. That the kits are supposed to be checked by someone, and this shouldn't happen, but obviously sometimes it does. Just
on kits, Rich, and I think Phil mentioned this before, Salford's kit was that's the best kit.
You like it?
Yeah, it's similar to, I think it's maybe an Argentinian football club, but it was great, but I mean, they played like busted asses, so whether you can or not, it kind of matters if you can tackle and pass the ball.
The only thing that kind of ruins the Salford kit is the sponsor cuts across the design, but that's sponsors, you can have them, so that's okay.
The issue though with Salford, I mean, I think
they're in crisis. They're in crisis officially. They might be kicked out of the stadium. They're rubbish.
I don't want Gemma Carter to start trolling me or B cry, but no. Putting the off-field to one side for a second, I mean, I thought they would struggle this year with the players they've lost. Kevin Brown bringing you out. Ian Watson is kind of the key figure who got them to the grand final and Challenge Cup. It was always going to be a tough year, and you don't lose Noel Evans and Joey Lustig and continue on. So I thought they'd be in the bottom 3 or 4. They still may not be. It's so early season. But then again, I thought Catalans might struggle, and they're doing very well and undefeated. But the big issue is the stadium, Rich. I mean, spoke to some people over the weekend, and that's a massive issue. I mean, if they get kicked out of that stadium, that could be the end of the club, because they don't seem to have there doesn't seem to be another stadium they can go to. And people talk about, I don't want to get too political, but people talk about what's the EU done for the UK? Well, that was EU money that built that stadium. So the fact that they could sell off the stadium that was built with EU money to Rugby Union is pretty bored. So I hope Super League and the RFL support the Red Devils and Paul King and the club there, because they need to stay where they are. And they moved out of the Willows to keep the RFL happy. They shouldn't be punished, down the line, I think.
I think one of the big shareholders in the stadium development is still the council, and they have a say over the sale to any third party. And the council are in debt to the rugby league team for a significant amount of money, I think, to make sure that they'd either have to be some very significant return, or they would have to get a tenancy agreement as part of an agreed sale. So it is a worry, but I think the council are very much on their side at the moment.
Well, I think it's being played out, Phil. I think there's elections in May, and I think it's being played out as an election issue, because obviously the Red Devils last year and the year before were flavour of the month with the council, with the local mayor, everything. But Sale aren't even based in Salford. They just play their games there, and to sell off an EU-funded stadium to Cheshire-based millionaires or multi-millionaires, and
who allowed people to break contracts last week.
Well, yeah, we probably don't want to go down that line, but yeah, I think there's even I don't know, Gary Neville's very popular with his brand, but I think there's Salford City Football people in league with the rugby union people as well. So, it's a real concern, I think, for the Red Devils and their future. So, hopefully that situation gets sorted and, they stay at the AJBL.
One thing I would say is that the Catalan kit is equally as good. I think that is a really classy number as well. And they're playing as if they are in a very classy kit at the moment. Yeah. And Sam Tompkins is playing as well as I've seen him, because whilst he was an amazing talent coming through, the maturity he's now got is making him arguably... I mean, watching him and Hardacre play every week is an absolute joy if Sean Wayne is going to stick by the principle of I'm only going to pick the best player in each position. And Tompkins is as good as anything I've seen from him in his career so far. But he's got some players around that are really doing the business. Maloney seems to have taken a lot of pressure off Tompkins. Drinkwater's playing a little bit more like he did when they won the Cup, as opposed to when he was at London and Lee. They've got some strike in the centres, which is great. But the pack is really, really solid. Very hard to break down. Meakin looks like a shrewd buy. Julian Busquet is a different player this year. He seems to have bulked up a lot. He's really tough to put down. And I think Cassiano's having a bigger influence than he's ever had off the bench, because he's not making mistakes at the moment. Normally, for every ball he'd run through the opposition, he'd drop 3, and he's not doing that. They're looking really, really solid at the moment.
Just as an aside, because you mentioned the word Tompkins, before I forget, not a fan of players releasing long statements on social media after they've been found guilty by the RFL's disciplinary committee and then found having their appeal denied and then still pleading their innocence. Because I'm not sure where that leads to in the end. Because next time their club has a player who is sinned against, well, surely they won't accept the decision either of the disciplinary committee.
Rich, I don't think there's anything wrong with pleading your innocence, but just spell check it and use punctuation. I mean, I'm pretty bad at spelling punctuation myself, but that's an eyesore, that statement. I mean,
I just don't think clubs should. I think clubs should have a word with the players and just say, look, the best thing is just to not bring it up again. Just leave it. Obviously not talking about Joel Tompkins here, we're talking about what's happened at Bradford. But speaking of punctuation and grammar, I had a leaflet through from one of the prospective council candidates in my wonderful Vista, and the spelling and grammar on that was appalling, which made me glad that someone checks my work for the magazine every month. We spoke about every game in Super League apart from the 2 on Friday, which none of us were at, which is Castleford battering Lee in the end, 52-16, and having been 0-0 at half-time, Wakefield losing to St Helens 34-6. I guess both results not unexpected, and I know there's a consternation among the Wakefield supporters about the result, but if you looked at the fixture list when it came out, as I did, I worried about when Wakefield's first points were coming, and I didn't think they'd come in the first 3 games, to be honest. So Wakefield are no farther behind than I thought they would be at this point of the season.
When I spoke to Chris Chester before the kickoff, he did mention the fixture list and how they'd kind of been given a bit of a slap. But I do have some news for you on the Andrew Fafita hunt. I think the change in coach, which is obviously was quite unexpected, has sort of thrown a spanner in the works now with Josh Hannay, the interim coach, until next year when Craig Fitzgibbon takes over from, obviously with John Morris going. I think Fafita now is thinking he might have a clean slate to actually play in the NRL. So I don't think, at least as it stands right now, he'll be coming to Wakefield at the moment. That could change in the next couple of weeks. But
they want Dave as well. They want Dave.
Does that mean Adam Tangata will be back?
No, I don't think it will, Phil, and I don't think they're probably comparable players.
I have a question for you, because you're both far more intelligent than I am. I get that we want to play our league games outside of Sky matches, and one of the reasons that Sky have given clubs the right to stream their games for their season ticket holders is to give value back to the fans of that home team. But why are we playing our league games at the same time as each other? Why are we now getting 2 games at 6 o'clock on a Friday?
I have no idea. I don't get our league model. I mean, when you can pay £12 a month to get the Watch NRL app, and you can get every NRL game, you can get New South Wales Cup, Queensland Cup, NRL Women, all the magazine shows for £12, and an our league game costs you £5 or £10 as well. I mean, surely to try and encourage more people, you would have a flat membership option as well, so you can pay, for a month you can pay £10 or £15, because I think that's more likely to get penetration than one-off. I mean, the interesting thing, Phil, is, and it's not really surprising because it's the RFL, but they won't tell us what the streaming numbers are. I mean,
but we do know they were great on Twitch for the women's game this weekend.
Oh.
But all I'm saying now, because we need to talk about the women's game, is that I get that the only people that can watch the games on our league are the home season ticket holders. So actually, in some respects, scheduling them against each other doesn't affect an audience. But I would still have thought, if you're going to show highlights on social media as the games are going on, you would play them at different times, because it gives you another time slot to show a game and the highlights of that game and get a story out there about that game. And again, this Friday, we've got two matches that are both kicking off at 6 o'clock on Friday. And I can't remember, but the game that was on later on Sky last Friday didn't show the highlights of the two games that have been played at 6 o'clock, I don't think. I might have missed it. I might have nipped out for a wee, but I didn't see it. In which case, what is the point of playing early on a Friday?
Two things on that, Phil, and I think you mentioned it to me, why you don't have the Watch NRL app, because Sky showed 2 or 3 NRL games, and then you see all the other tries on Twitter for free, because the NRL do so well with video highlights. So what's the point of putting each try up on social media if you want people to watch the game? I mean, there's a balance, isn't there? I don't think you put every try up, but you might put 1 or 2 up, or, you put up some talking points. Also, just further to that, we're obviously, is it next month, we're going to have partial crowds back. Is the streaming going to continue every game? Every time someone picks up a ball, it gets live streamed when they're full crowds in? Because is it just streaming because we've got no crowds, or will it be streaming to try and spread the word outside of the normal season ticket holders? I don't.
The interesting thing about that is some clubs will have more season ticket holders than the capacity that is allowed in the ground. So you would think those games would have to be streamed, and yet there'll be other clubs who, if they're allowed 4,000 fans in the ground, don't have 4,000 season ticket holders, so those games perhaps shouldn't be streamed.
Well,
then do you stream them for the away fans who have it as pay-per-view, but does Sky release the rights when they've already paid for them, or do they ask for money back? It's a real minefield.
It is, and if you're streaming a game to 500 people, is that worth even streaming it? I mean, it is a minefield. I don't really know what the policy or the strategy is, but yeah.
The only other thing to mention from the games this weekend, Danny Houghton, world record 85 tackles in 80 minutes. Two things. One, we spoke, I can't remember if it was last week because I don't know what day it is, about using stats as a tool.
It was 2 weeks ago on what has been described as our normal podcast.
Right. So one of the things we discussed and I proposed we need to do more of and quicker is get stats out there. Now, the day after the game's been played, when the agenda about that game has probably diminished, other than to those of us who follow the sport anyway, we've had this phenomenal story of, I would imagine, the record number of tackles in a game being beaten. In the same way that on Friday night, nobody was really sure, but we thought that the world record had been beaten for the fastest try. I just think we need to do more quicker to tell these stories. Whether there's a debate about why should Danny Houghton be doing 85 tackles in a game, is that, and does that say something about the work rate of those around it? And does that diminish other parts of his game to the extent that he is solely a tackling machine? Is secondary to the fact that there was a great story there that we didn't tell. Or we're all playing now?
It wasn't the 85 tackles either. I think it was the 3 tackles that they missed in the final seconds of the game, which cost them a win, which was unforgivable. Jake Mamo probably won't score a more important try. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think I did a podcast with Brian Carney on By the Balls just after the grand final. We still don't have the match stats from the grand final, and that was a far better, more intense game with, I imagine, even better stats because it was so gripping, and so, but we don't still have the stats from that game. So it's the same thing that happens all the time. But if we don't ever do anything about it. If we don't have a promotion or a media engagement, a marketing arm that pushes these things out or contacts people in the media to tell them about it, then what are we expected to do? I mean, I think it was Ian Lenigan 4 weeks ago who said that ratings were up in 2019 and 2020. Well, why has no one sent out a press release about that? Why did I have to chase several people to get the TV ratings from the grand final last year when they were so good? Why would you not be shouting about that all the time? But it's like
absolutely.
That thing in a forest, isn't it? If you cut down a tree, does it make a noise if no one hears it? Probably not.
I was interested in the performance of Mikolaj Aledski on Thursday night because he'd been called into the England training squad 2 days before. He's got a really interesting background, which obviously had generated some stories. And then 2 days later, he goes out, plays the full 80 minutes, and his stats were ridiculous. I think he had something like 44 tackles, and he was the leading meter maker with nearly 200 metres. You can find that information if you know where to look for it, but by the time you've found it, it's too late to actually make a positive out of it. And I'm only using him as an example. There will have been people like that in every game that was played this weekend that made a ridiculous contribution that is measurable. There was one game this week that somebody ran 14 kilometres or something. And again, if we can't tell people how athletic our guys are, we can't sell them. And we go on all the time it's about personality and building up players and not guys in suits. And we've got ammunition there and we don't fire it.
I think there's only so you can be best kept secret, can't you? And then it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I generally have a look at the stats most weekends because you do find an interesting angle, and I didn't notice the Aledski numbers, and someone tweeted me, and they were phenomenal. I mean, in a losing team, they were superhuman. But yeah, there was some huge numbers. I think I'm just trying to find it now, but I can't seem to find it. But Matty Parcell, George Lawler, Fuad Yaha, I think scored 2 tries. Busted something like 9 tackles and made close to 200. There was some amazing numbers, but yeah, they're not. We don't promote them enough. We don't market them enough, and we don't get access. I know. People say the access in rugby league to players and coaches is great, but it really isn't in my experience.
That's because you're banned from most Super League grounds, though.
Well, I'm anti. Who am I anti this week? I think I'm anti-Wigan,
Anti-Wigan.
Definitely Lee and anti-Toronto and Salford and Hull and, okay.
I mean, we're not going to talk about the Women's Super League yet, but as you mentioned, would it surprise you, John, then, that obviously last week we spoke to 5 players from 5 different clubs in the Women's Super League. I emailed all 10 clubs. 3 of them didn't have the decency to reply or acknowledge my email.
Doesn't surprise. It doesn't. Actually, just sorry to interrupt you, Rich. I'll let you go back. But I just found St Helens James Bentley 43 tackles, 146 metres, and 1 try. Casper Daryl Alford's 241 metres, 9 tackle busts, and 2 tries. George Lawler 52 tackles, 18 carries, 131 metres. Matt Parcell 42 tackles, 7 tackle busts, 139 metres, and I imagine that's probably playing 40 or 50 minutes until Jez Letton comes on. Huddersfield, Luke Yates, 51 tackles, 93 metres. Fuad Yaha, 3 tries, 3 tackle busts, 163 metres. And the Aledski numbers were, as Phil said. So, yeah, people are doing superhuman efforts every weekend and they don't get the recognition that they deserve. But, sorry, Rich.
No, I think I just made the point. disappointing. You know, obviously you work around people's schedules. Sometimes you can't work things out. That's what happens. But to have 3 clubs not reply or acknowledge an email, and some people think, oh, you've got a big head, haven't you? You're just some bloke on a podcast. Yeah, but it's just that all you have to do is say no, or just sorry, we're busy.
I'll give you an example, Rich. So I emailed a club on Friday about requesting a player, didn't get a response. Then sent a message on the Saturday, didn't get a response. And this is at a club that says we want to talk about the players, not the men in suits. But if you don't allow the players to do interviews, and I understand not every interview is acceptable at that time, but it's like I don't want to swear, but it's like pushing shit up the hill at times, and it does get very demoralising and depressing after a while. But yeah, on the Women's Super League, I think you made a really good point. The weekend, and I think there's a lot to unpack there when you look at the scorelines, which are pretty nightmarish.
I mean, there's an interesting thing, isn't there? Because I think we, on this programme, when they announced Huddersfield and Warrington were going to be promoted, it'll be a couple of years ago now, we were a bit unsure about it. Every player we've spoken to has been in favour of it. So who are we to say, go against what they think? But I think this weekend has almost shown what we said to an extent. It's not that we're taking 1 week and saying that's what's going to happen for the rest of the season.
But it's the way that the fixtures fell as well. I think when you looked at
we said that as well.
You could see teams that that are going to be at the top of the league playing teams that are going to be at the bottom of the league. I think the other thing is we get too hung up about scores. If you equate 10 points in rugby league to a goal in football, which I think is a fair comparison, then you're talking about 6-0, 7-0, 8-0. Well, I seem to remember, was it Southampton got beat 9-0 in the Premiership this year, and they were in the semi-final of the FA Cup, and Arsenal, was it Liverpool, who were the defending champions, got beaten by 7 at Aston Villa? I wouldn't worry about it. We know that there is a disparity between the haves and have-nots, and that a couple of the teams were new to the game. To put Bradford up against St Helens was always going to be the most difficult of asks when you look at who St Helens have recruited and where Bradford are at the moment in the women's game. I just think the coverage it got, the depth and the breadth before a ball was kicked in so many different media outlets, from national newspapers to social media sites, the number of people who were interviewed across the different clubs who all came across brilliantly well. They've got some really great, vibrant personalities. The fact that Twitch took a game and what were the figures today? 30,000 people were watching it, 300,000 worldwide. I don't know how you measure that, but again, they seem like really good numbers for a game that wasn't close. You look at Sky are now doing a highlights package every week from that Twitch game. We're building up to a women's international. We're building up to grand finals that are being shown live, Challenge Cup finals that are being shown live, and a World Cup that, again, let's be honest, Australia and New Zealand we already know are going to dominate it because they're fully professional and at a different standard. That isn't going to stop.
They're not fully professional.
Well,
I don't mean to interrupt you there, but I disagree with a lot of what you said there, because I think you can account 1 or 2 blowouts, but when you get an 86-0, a 52-8, a 68-16, and a 40-6, you've effectively got 2 competitions. You've got,
but we know that.
Yeah, but why would you bring in 2 very weak teams to an already competition that's lopsided? I mean, it's madness. I understand they want to grow women's rugby league. They want more opportunities. And I'm not just saying because this is what the NRL does, it's better. But in the NRL, they have 4 teams. So you hothouse the talent, the very best, play against the very best. It's like an origin every week. It's a short competition. They are paid. They're not full-time, but I think they're semi-pro. You'd probably say they're paid partly. But it makes them better because there are no blowouts. They're competing against the best. Here, and that flows into the Australian and New Zealand national teams. Hence, they are so good. We've got a World Cup this year. If England get absolutely flogged in the Women's World Cup, what is that going to do? It's just going to back for the game.
Now, what it'll do is the opening game when England play Brazil, which again your argument would say Brazil shouldn't be in it because it's
because Fiji actually qualified and Brazil got it's a joke. But anyway, we won't go into that.
I think there is going to be not far short of 15 to 20,000 people there, and that justifies it.
Yes, Phil, but when the Silver Ferns, beat England by 40 points, or when the Gillaroos beat them by 50 points, and I think it was Danica Prim on this program, speaking as someone who's played for England in World Cups, who said in 2013 the gap wasn't much. In 2017 the gap was quite a lot. I'm pretty sure the gap's only gotten worse because they're taking leaps and bounds and they're playing, they're restricting to make the quality better. While over here, we're just flooding in and making the quality a lot worse. And I just think it's really the wrong approach. And I've spoken to people in the women's game who agree with me. No one's sort of publicly come out and said it, but I just think it's completely the wrong approach. I think, particularly for a new sport, you need to increase the intensity. And maybe you only have 4 clubs. And maybe you only have Castleford, Leeds, St Helens and Wigan. And then you have a second division. So you've got those opportunities, but it would improve the national team, which if the national team got some success in the World Cup or they beat Australia and New Zealand in a few tests, as opposed to being beaten by PNG in PNG and being 4th rate, if not 3rd rate, I'm sure that would be a better overall for the women's game because I think it's going to, it could be I don't want to say a disaster, but it could be a disaster in the World Cup.
No, I don't think it's anything other than... I agree that in principle we are running a little bit before we can walk, but I do think this is about participation and exposure. And the press release today saying that there's going to be a competition in the south of England and Wales for women is a huge step forward. I think the more people that you can get into the reservoir, the greater the bigger the pool of talent, the better the fish will be that come out of it. So I just think, you look at women's soccer. I don't follow it, but I can see that there are some results that are like 7-0, 8-0, 10-0. Wasn't there an Australian goalkeeper who plays for one of the English teams that ended up playing outfield this week because the team so easily? But when we got to the World Cup, the Women's World Cup, it would have been great if England had won, but it was clearly evident that teams like America were so much better than them. But they got to the semi-final, they got the nation behind them, they got more girls playing soccer, they got pundits then in the media. Yeah, I think there is no right or wrong way of doing it. I just think that we shouldn't look at 1 week's results where we knew there were going to be wide margins and say that doesn't justify what we're doing. To me, and I think I tweeted it over the weekend, this is the area of the sport more than any other at the moment that can drag it into the 21st century and make it commercial and viable.
I don't see that though.
I agree with you. The potential is massive, and that's why it's so important we get it right. And that's why I think this approach is wrong, because it mirrors the Super League, Championship, League One approach, where you've got too many places and not enough good players to go around to. So you've got a watering down of the quality as opposed to a hothouse, which actually it makes the intensity greater and produces better players from that environment. You talk about, and excuse the irony, but the Women's Super League is what the women's football competition is called in England. And the reason why that's gone strength to strength, not only because it's got Premier League clubs backing it, but they've now got arguably the best players outside of America in the world. So Chelsea have got England internationals, they've got Germany, they've got Australian internationals, and it is really high quality stuff. Yes, you still get a couple of clubs, I think Bristol City and probably West Ham are down the bow, but they've all got internationals from around the world, much like the Premier League. And that's why that competition is much better than it was perhaps 2 or 3, 4 years ago. You are always going to get blowouts. And, Leeds v Cass is going to be a great game, Wigan v Leeds, St Helens v Cass, etc. But 86-0, I don't think that helps anyone. I mean, I'm sorry, Rich, I'll just say this last time. I've played football / soccer a long time, and I can remember losing 10-0, 11-0. It didn't do me any good, and that was in a church competition. So, yeah.
When I saw the handicaps the bookmakers have put out for Saints versus Bradford, I thought 24 points is very low, but I didn't expect Saints to win by that many.
That was only for the first 10 minutes.
I know. But as we said weeks ago, the first round of fixtures, in terms of, they were terrible. They were not what you should launch the season with. And you should have had Leeds versus Cass or Wigan versus Saints or whatever, because I'm not sure what you get from some of those games at the weekend. Warrington seem to be the darlings of the competition, of the promoted sides, because they're Warrington. But just because they've got the same name as the men's team doesn't mean that they're the same level in terms of quality. They're on again this week against Huddersfield in the Challenge Cup. And no one's seen Huddersfield, so we don't have a clue what that's going to be like.
Bradford used to be really successful, Rich. What's happened to them?
A lot of their players signed for Leeds, like D. Prim would be one of them.
Who?
Bloody Leeds.
She's persona non grata now. She's on Radio Leeds. We don't talk about her. And everywhere else. And of course, Amy Hardcastle went to St Helens. And she was on 5 Live on Sunday morning. And people say to you, why do you talk so much about the women's game? Why do you spend this much time talking about League One or the Championship where more people watch? Because you don't get it. Because there's no one from Championship Club or League One Club going on 5 Live and talking about Rugby League. Well,
unless it's Gavin Henson, where again you're talking about a star name. I think we shouldn't focus on the results. I think that the fixtures look to me like they've been geared up to have those intense games that you were talking about towards the end of the regular season and leading into the playoffs. And the idea of that is that those who will be playing in the England World Cup squad will get the intense games when they need them leading into the World Cup. So I think a lot of thought has gone into it. But I think we are going for... It's very much about, we're a sport that is reliant on external funding. And one of our chief funders at the moment is Sport England. And one of the things they measure the sport on are participation numbers. And I think a conscious decision has been made, particularly dripping down into the community level, to say the more women we can have playing, the more exposure we can give the women's game, the more likelihood there is for more women and girls to play. Therefore, we can get more Sport England funding. So I can see why they've gone. I agree with you. And we said it right at the very beginning that I honestly thought there should have been 2 divisions this year. The haves and the have-nots, and then the haves contain all the players that are going to end up at the World Cup, and they are properly prepared for when that World Cup comes along. But we've got 1 division. And I think there's a debate to be had going right back to the very beginning of this programme about what does a modern sporting model look like, and what can we learn from what's happening in football at the moment. How many teams do we want in Super League if we want to get the kind of quality that will ever beat Australia again? Well, and it isn't 12 and it isn't 14.
Well, Phil, it's the state of origin argument, isn't it? It's that the NRL is intensity, and then the state of origin is a higher intensity, and then the Australian team from that. So when they come against New Zealand and England, they have it's an unfair advantage, an additional advantage. It's a similar thing in the women's game, really, and I think that's why they're going, they got 15,000 people, what was it, not last year before, at a state of origin game at North Sydney, because the women's game there is such a high standard, because it is just the best, the very best against the very best. There's no 86-0s, there's no, but I could be wrong, and I'll probably be proven wrong in the World Cup. So,
the other thing I would ask, because I'm not au fait with it, is what is the level of women's rugby league like underneath those 4 teams that is feeding them? So I know there's a New South Wales competition, there's a Queensland competition. Charlotte Booth, I think, is playing for one of the Queensland teams. So clearly there is women's rugby league. What kind of standard is that that feeds into it?
Because I'm in South Yorkshire, I couldn't comment particularly, but you are right. Yeah, I think there's a Sydney competition, a Brisbane competition. Much like there is in the men's game, Queensland Cup, or Brisbane, New South Wales Cup, which feeds into that. But you then you can cherry pick. I think it's the Roosters, isn't it? And maybe South Sydney, they can pick the best players from that competition to play in the NRLW as the Broncos can and the New Zealand Warriors. So effectively, the New Zealand Warriors are a Silver Ferns New Zealand national team, which is great for them. I mean, could you imagine an England team, de facto England team, playing in the Women's Super League?
Yeah, they're called St Helens, John.
Yeah, I thought they were called Leeds. Yeah, but yeah, look, it will be interesting. I mean, I think the proof will be in the pudding. I just think there's more chance of England catching up in the women's game quickly than in the men's game because it's such at an early point in terms of its origin, its birth. But I think the watering down from this point is in my opinion, and as I said, it's only my opinion, is the wrong strategy. But you are right, Phil, that there's got to be a push to get media coverage, visibility, participation up as well. And, you know, massive push for women's sport across all sports, netball, football, basketball, etc. So, you know, rugby league definitely needs to be, women's rugby union, it needs to be right a part of that.
I look forward to the Challenge Cup games this weekend. We need to talk about the Championship, but before that, because it kind of links in, you talk about the coverage on Twitch. It looked professional. Ben Pro, obviously from Sky Sports. Tony Ray, everyone has fallen in love with again now. They all love Tony Ray now. He's doing these games in our league. A busy man on the Our League app. It looked professional. It looked like, and that's part of the key. As long as it looks and sounds professional, the impression to those who haven't got a clue will be that it is professional.
You picked the key because clearly you were watching the Wigan-Warrington game. You saw an astonishing handoff from Rachel Thompson.
No, it's Victoria Molyneux.
Sorry, Victoria Molyneux. And not only did you highlight it and say this should be a GIF, but it became one, and it became a talking point on social media. So again, nobody will remember that game was finished 50-odd, not as many. They will remember that game for seeing a loose forward breakthrough and bend in half the person that came to try and tackle them. And I think, again, that's more important where we are at the moment than what the final score was.
You know, Georgie Wilson scores 5 tries, no one cares because someone gets pushed over. But it's the same with, if you look at basketball, and the BBC put like a basketball highlight up every day, it seems. It's just someone doing, you know, something spectacular or whatever. No one cares about the results and anything else because you're just looking for that spectacular viral sports clip. Mm-hmm. Ben Crook's try is a similar thing. The try wasn't spectacular, but the fact that it was scored in 7 seconds was, and the comedy defending, of course. Should have put the Benny Hill music over it.
What was it, the tackle back against PNG that was the most watched social media clip in the sport? Nobody remembers that there was a try on the back of that. It doesn't matter. It was just the actual act of chasing somebody down from so far away and pulling them down to stop them scoring. I think we are going in the right direction. I think Claire Balding now will become even more vociferous as we get less restrictions in society to sell the women's game. I think we're seeing more and more women in positions analysing games, even men's games, that are absolutely capturing the nation. I think, you know, Courtney Winfield-Hill has been hailed as, you know, one of the best analysts we've seen in the opening rounds of Men's Super League, and this is all good for the sport. I think we can bring in a new audience and new sponsors on the back of all this, and I would put results secondary at the moment, and I do think there is a plan to drift all of this into a World Cup which is going to elevate it to another level. And actually, if England didn't win the World Cup in 2021 but became even more competitive in 2025 and had a chance of winning it maybe in France, then I think you are aiming. The next Women's Soccer World Cup, a lot more people will be watching to see if England do topple one of the giants in the semi-final.
They won't be getting, it's in Australia and New Zealand, Phil. They won't be getting any support. And I do actually remember that there was a try off that next tackle because I was at that game at Bankwest Stadium. It was in the World Cup 9. So some of us do, even though we were very hungover.
And clubs should take a leaf out of Castlewood's book, who put the score at the end of every tweet so you know what's actually going on in the match for games you can't watch. So well done to the Tigers. I mentioned Ben Pro and Tony Ray because everyone seems to want us to talk about the commentary on the telly before we get on to the Championship. I am still of the opinion that people overpraise the BBC because they're on once a month and slag off Sky gets on every week. And it's not that everything on Sky is great or everything on the BBC is great or everything on the BBC is terrible or everything on Sky is terrible. There are parts of the courage of each which are good, parts of everything of each which I would change. But as you said earlier, John, commentary is extremely subjective. And there are some commentators out there I think are terrible, but still get work. And some commentators I think are great who you hardly hear from.
Yeah.
But what can you do?
Yeah, no, I think it's massively subjective. There's commentators that I really like, others that I tolerate, some which I despise, like Ray Hadley. It's just, it is a subjective thing. I get the argument that to make Super League more appealing to everyone in the UK, make it less Northern, less Yorkshire, less parochial. I completely understand that. And I think that's why they have Brian Carney, an Irishman, fronting Telecast, and have Janet Brooks, an Australian, doing the interviews, because that is a conscious, recognition of that. But I think, on the whole, apart from maybe Phil Clark's fashion choices, and I don't agree with, I think some of his opinions are laughable, comical, but, it is subjective. There's probably a lot of people who love them, so you can't please everyone. And I've talked to Barry McDermott about this. I think it's part of the game, and I think a lot of people, knowing Brian Carney and knowing Barry a little bit, they do a lot of research. They don't just rock up on a Friday or Thursday night and talk out their backsides. They speak to people in the game. They read. So it's a lot harder too than most people think.
It's all about personal preference. I mean, at the moment, my favourite commentator from the NRL is Dan Ginnane. Not somebody I know a lot about, not somebody I know where he's come from. I just find at the moment, the games that we're watching, he captures better than anybody, I think, that level of excitement. Now, quite understandably, if the standard of the game is incredibly high, less is often more. And if you're commentating on games that are either one-sided or the quality is relatively low, that's a very different brief. So I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all. But it is solely down to revisionary theory. You will only get better when you've retired. So, at the time that Eddie Waring was coming towards the end of his career, he was the worst thing that could ever have happened to rugby league. He was a caricature of the sport. Now we fondly look back and going, oh, Eddie's days, they were the glory days. So, I think it was the great Ray French that once said, if 50% of the people like you and 50% of the people hate you, then you're doing a great job.
He's gone on a big bollocking run. That was my favourite.
Sounds like my Twitter feed, Phil.
It's the Andrew Ross theory, isn't it, that I have, that if he was doing every game over here, people would soon get tired of him because he's got a very distinctive style.
He has.
And it's very personality-led. But if you say the same things about pie and peas in Halifax every game, then you're going to get sick and tired of him. And he's all right because he's over there and we only have to listen to him once or twice a week, so it's all right. I think what doesn't help Sky, and this is purely, again, a personal opinion, is if you listen back to some of the games that they did before, and in fact, you don't have to listen back to the old Eddie and Steve-O games. You can just listen to Saturday's game on with Jim Catalans and Salford. It was just Bill and Barry, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to a normal game where you've got 700 people needing to chip in and have an opinion, and I think it's difficult for whoever's driving the ship to steer that ship when you've got a million people who want to say something rather than just one person. But
you mentioned Eddie and Steve-O as well, but there were enough people saying it's about time they retired who are now calling for them to come back. So you are never going to please everybody.
There's a bit of nostalgia there, isn't there, Phil? Like you hark back to what you don't have anymore, but then when it was there at the end, you kind of. I mean, I think personally, even though he's a friend of all of us here, but I think Mark Wilson is a really good caller, and he's done a good job on Sky when he's been on. But then I'll see people will tweet me like, no, he's not very good. So it's just completely subjective. I think one person likes a certain commentator and one person doesn't. Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would reiterate is it's a lot more difficult than you think as well. It is a real skill, and talking to people like Terry O'Connor in the gaps between games, that they take this incredibly seriously. They don't just get out the car and go, because I used to play, I know what I'm talking about. And he in particular is extremely aware of how, he calls it, privileged he is to be able to call a game, and they don't do it lightly. And also the other thing you've got to remember is that sometimes they're told by their producers and directors exactly the style that they want them to comment in. So they want to play it up a little bit. They want to, have this banter between each other. And that, is something that they are being told to do as part of their role, rather than it being seen to be, it's their show kind of thing. So you got to take all that into account.
But Test Match Special was really good 20 years ago, and it's not as good now.
Yeah, and Match of the Day was fantastic when Kenneth Wolstenholme was on it.
Jimmy Hill.
Could dig up Richie Beno and somehow regenerate it just to do every sport. So it's 2 for 22. That'd be welcome back. That'd be good, but we can't. So.
And the other thing as well is we've got hundreds of different angles showing loads of different things. The actual coverage itself, Richie Beno was absolutely brilliant and would be in any era. The sort of bloke, a bit like John Arlott, that when he was on the telly, you stopped and just watched and listened. Technologically, he literally had the same view that you did watching. He saw the ball, he commented on the ball. If you waited, you got a replay of the ball. Now you'd have that ball from 75 different angles. It's a lot different pace to what it used to be. It's a different commentating style.
He also had the beige, the white, the off-key suits. The variety of off-white suits for every.
That's where Phil Clark gets it from.
I do love going back to that clip where he talks about Trevor Chappell's underarm bowling and just slags it off. That's brilliant. It's a wonderful piece of television. God bless Richie Beno.
He's going over that, Rich. Thanks for mentioning it.
I know we had lots of questions about NRL funding, Super League and stuff, but I don't think we got the time to go into it today, which I apologise for, because I haven't mentioned the results in the Championship, and someone will hit me if I don't mention them. Batley 48, Oldham 10, great win for the Bulldogs. To lose with a 24-0 win over London, didn't see that coming. Widnes 14, Dewsbury 22.
They'd be pleased with the nil. Defensively, they'd be delighted with that.
What a weekend.
The last even got off the plane.
Oh, what a weekend for the WF postcode.
Didn't get off the bus.
Batley win. Dewsbury beat Widnes 22-14, which is a superb victory for the Rams. And already the Widnes fans are in apoplexy of rage over that one.
Dewsbury unbeaten. Are they going under the radar this year?
Well, they may do at the moment, right? With the world's oldest halfbacks. Sykes and Finn.
What about the mighty Sheffield Eagles? I mean, Super League back in Doncaster maybe next year. I mean, they're on fire.
Boiling the urine of Halifax as well this week, so they're doing a great job of winding everyone up as well. Mark Aston, what a man.
It is a great start to the season for the Eagles, because again, I think even privately they were saying this isn't a year where we're going to challenge the top 4 or 5, and yet the start that they've made and the teams that they've beaten, you would have looked at the fixture list and gone, Bradford and then York. We'll wait a couple of weeks before we get our first win on the board. That is a tremendous start to the season.
Yeah.
Sheffield winning 20 points to 14 at York. Whitehaven beat Newcastle 29-20. Great result for Haven. Bradford beating Halifax 27-26. As I say, great weekend for the WF postcode, apart from Wakefield. At least our women didn't lose, so that's good.
The important thing for Bradford there would be the spirit that they showed, because didn't they go something like 16 down and were giving away penalties in every set of 6? And you'd seen what had happened to them the week before and how disappointed John Keir was in their attitude. I think he say this didn't even look like a team that I'd ever coached. And to play against one of your nearest rivals and come back from that far behind and win it, a bit like Hull KR this week, that psychologically is a big win for Bradford.
And just for Pitchside Pete, who tweeted us, because I know we'll be really happy with this result, because he said, don't you think how much more entertaining is the Championship than Super League right now? I don't know, because I don't watch any of it, because I'm not paying any money. But the mighty Featherstone Rovers are, of course, fully behind in this household. 36-6 winners away at Swinton. And it's a Mark Aston 1-2 at the top of the Championship table. Sheffield, Featherstone, Toulouse up there as well. And the most cosmopolitan league in the world.
What's your opinion, Rich, on the Featherstone might be losing their winger for a week or two, or maybe?
My opinion is players on social media shouldn't be stupid. What you say in private to people and what you say in public, which is what social media is, even if you're behind a locked account or whatever, are two different things.
You've
got to know your audience, haven't you? You've got to know your audience, and whether the intent is there to offend, we'll find out when the panel make their opinions. But you've got to realise that there's an audience out there who won't take things in the context you write them in. There's many times I thought of something funny to write that isn't offensive, and I thought, I'm not going to put that because someone will find it offensive.
Mm.
I think it's a test of the RFL's diversity policy. So we'll see. Again, it's all alleged. Nothing's been proven. It needs to be heard and a decision come up. But should it be deemed that the player concerned is guilty, then the punishment he gets will be really, really interesting, because that'll say a lot about how serious the game is about its whole policy around inclusivity.
And it is about context, this one, isn't it? Because it is a joke which may have backfired, rather than coming out on social media and having an obvious opinion about, well, whatever that former Halifax player did last year, for example, who was rightly called out by his fellow professionals.
But you do have to set an example as well. I think the first person who is found guilty, and we're not saying that this case has been tried yet, so it's not aimed at whoever is charged at the moment. If they are found guilty, you set a tone by the first punishment you give.
We're in a strange situation, aren't we? Football is going gangbusters on social media companies for the way they deal with people who send abhorrent abuse to other people on social media. And yet there are people within football who were banned with tiny amounts of games for using racist language on the pitch, and are promoted into coaching roles at top professional clubs, and may well be speaking to the England players ahead of the World Cup. So, what can you do?
What, Jose Mourinho?
No, he's not racist, or ever used racist language. He did have a go at that physio at.
I thought you meant speaking to the England team.
No, he could do though. It'd be great. What do you mean? He's not doing anything right now. Maybe he could be the next Castleford coach. He could be like the reverse John Harbin from our Australia's greatest ever coach. Rugby league and football. Is there anything glaringly obvious that I haven't mentioned? Apart from obviously the NRL. Oh, the NRL. Well,
no, we're not mentioning
that. Tom Burgess, yeah.
No, the NARL.
Oh, the NARL. Oh, the Rebels.
I've read a very interesting feature by Mr. Philip Kaplan today in a magazine that was posted. I think that one. Yeah, that his advice was strap yourselves in for the ride and see what happens.
I think again we're not a sport that at the moment can be too prescriptive. I think there isn't enough information known that the devil is always in the detail, and for whatever reason at the moment we don't have sufficient detail on really important things. But there's no point tearing ourselves apart, because actually if there is a policy for North America and it can be dovetailed and it can work and more people can play, a bit like the women's game, it's never going to be the right time. It's never going to be the right model. It's never going to be the right market. But if you don't do it, and if the only legacy we get from the original Toronto Wolfpack is that more people in North America know of and want to play this sport, and there can be some finance in it, and there can be a television deal in it. I'm not sure we should be either condemning it or ruling it out or saying it's the best thing that's ever going to happen. Just as I said, look at it with a slightly jaundiced eye, because this is rugby league. But let's see what happens.
Well, yeah, just to clarify a comment on YouTube from the last time we spoke about this, and it said, we're pro expansion, but then questioning this. Yeah, but you have to question it, because otherwise you're just saying everything's great and taking things on face value. These are made-up clubs that we know nothing about. And we've just gone through when New York set up and have played a sum total of 0 games but sold plenty of merch. We've got to say, do these things really exist? And when they do, we'll go, yeah, great. But until that point, it doesn't exist right now.
It's like building the new Castleford Stadium, isn't it? That when it exists, it'll be better than what they've got at the moment. But as we stand, it doesn't exist.
You can be all for it, definitely. But I mean, it's a different kettle of fish if you're the person, and obviously myself and you, Phil, and you, Rich, aren't. But if you're owed 150 grand by the Wolfpack, you might have a different view. So yeah, I mean, I think I urge everyone to read Phil's piece, because I think it's a good take on the situation. But there's just not a lot of detail or substance. But hopefully it goes well and that materialises, and yeah, people get paid, etc.
There is one thing that I find a little bit odd in all of this, and again, it's far too early to make a judgment, but I think it's probably worth just throwing out there. I don't want to demean rugby league, and I think that some of the times when people say, well, all we need to do is take college American footballers who failed, or players who are playing rugby union, and they come to a combine, and then we sign them up and they can all play rugby league. I think that demeans what we watch every week. It's a really tough sport, this, if not the toughest ever. And you can't just pluck people from different sports and expect them to play at a semi-professional level that is good enough to be televised. So I'm all for encouraging other athletes to play, but please don't tell me that just because they've had a trial, that it is an organised league of a certain standard.
Yeah, I think that's 110% the exact right thing, Phil. And people saying it's going to rival the standard of Super League in 7 to 10 years is not only laughable, it's embarrassing and pathetic, because you might be able to bench press 200 kilograms or whatever, but you have no idea how to throw a cutout pass or execute a 3-on-2 or do any of the things that people who played their whole lives understand. And I think maybe some modesty in starting small and not running before you can walk, and talk about a professional league when it's a semi-professional league at best that's below the national amateur, the conference league here. A bit of realism would probably not go astray. But look, we'll obviously watch and see what happens. Hopefully there'll be a press conference and there'll be someone able to interview about it. Hashtag positive rugby league.
Is that because they think the standard's going to be reached Super League because the standard of Super League's going backwards, as everyone keeps telling us? Is that what's happening?
Oh, obviously, yeah. It's yeah.
I just think they have to show respect to the athletes that are brought up playing this game, and how hard it is. And just because you've got some people in a training session that are mastering some basics and that are athletes, clearly, in other sports, that doesn't mean that you immediately have a reservoir of talent that is going to be of a standard. And you can sign some players, which is going to enhance what you've got. But I think if you're going to have 14 teams virtually from scratch, with predominantly players who are from the two nations that the teams are going to come from, you have to have a realistic expectation of what that is going to look like. We heard all about Red Star and how they were going to take the world. They were going to storm the world. And there are some great Serbians playing there who've played for anything up to 10 or 11 years. But they would admit that they are novices at the game at the moment. And when they played Milan, who are not even our best community club, in a Challenge Cup tie, and the only time we could benchmark where Red Star were at, they were beaten relatively easily. And that's all I'm saying, that the NIRL can sell themselves absolutely, but just show a bit of respect to the fact that it ain't that easy to play this game and get players.
And I think the point just on that, Phil, seems to be, obviously in the Americas, it's rugby is rugby, but as we know in the UK and in Australia and New Zealand, rugby union and rugby league are very different, and there's not many crossovers in the modern era of people going from rugby union and rugby league without playing the game before being successes. I mean, Luther Burrell is probably the most recent one. There's been lots of others. I'm actually really interested to see how TJ Paranara, who's the All Black who's been linked with the Roosters, will go, because I think he's obviously cousins with Sonny Bill Williams and Henry Paranara, the former player who's an NRL referee. I think he actually would go well, but there's not many examples in the modern era, of people succeeding, because rugby league is so hard to play at that elite level, so physically taxing and demanding. At
least what we can say about Kyle Eastman is his first game at Headingley was better than Sonny Bill Williams. That's one thing we can say.
Great afro. I like the afro. More good hairstyles in Super League, like Blake Wallace's luscious lock.
I mean, the best hanging spot at the moment is Neil Robertson, the snooker player. The Aussie snooker player's got a fantastic Barnet.
Not a sport. Anything you can play in a pub while you're drinking a pint is not a sport.
Well, if he wins, Australia will go mad, won't they? They'll go snooker loopy, so to speak.
Yeah, it's all the bandwagon. He looks like Paul Warren, and I think he's from Victoria as well with that.
So there's a chance then. It's like when darts had a bandwagon in Australia, and I was on SEN a couple of times for no apparent reason because they found me on Twitter. But the glory days, those glory days have gone. What are you writing about this week, John? What exclusives should we? Well, obviously you're not going to tell us, but hint at them.
If you pay me £1 a week, I will tell you. No,
how dare you want money for your job?
There's a story up about it at the moment. I think Mr. Ross happens. Well, Mr. Steve Mascot is writing something tonight. I don't know. He seems to have all the inside info on the NARL and all the factions and feuds in America. So I'll leave that to him. And Mr. Heppenstall is writing something. And yeah, I think I'm writing a long read on the World Cup and the perhaps gap between the Northern and Southern Hemisphere and maybe what will happen. I keep getting calls from Mr. Schofield that I keep hanging up on, so I'll have to answer one and see what the legend has got to say on the matter.
He's always got plenty to say. We did have a tweet saying, is Martin Sadler right? But I didn't get the paper today, so I don't know what he's right or about. So we might have to do that next week.
Everything.
Yeah, he's right about everything, I think. Phil, anything you want to mention before we go?
I couldn't possibly say the new issue of 4020 magazine is out now and in the shops. I couldn't say that.
That's even the Australian version.
Yeah.
On Patreon, it is rugbyleaguehub.com long reads. Google that, and you'll get some exclusive news and stuff, and the chicken wing, which is always amusing.
You can find which journalist had to make a grovelling apology for which club recently in the chicken.
Oh, it wasn't me. So I'm not a journalist. Oh dear.
It wasn't Phil.
Wasn't Phil either. Oh well. Well, I mean, we might have to make some apologies after this show. I don't know. I think we've been fairly positive, but we've been fair. That's all we can ever be.
But fair. That's all.
Unless you just start making things up, which is always good.
And Vale Tommy Rodonicus, who I once met in the Chainbull pub.
Cattle dog.
We should do a series of players you've met in pubs. That should be a new. I mean, mainly just be Scully, obviously, but
was he taller than you, Phil, or did he have a few inches on you?
I don't think I was brave enough to go anywhere near him. I got a beer mat signed by him, Graham Oliphant, because it took me about 3 years to work out who the signature was, and Rod Morris when the 78 Kangaroos were based in Leeds, and he used to like a pint at the Chainbull because mine host was George Broughton, who used to play for Leeds.
Obviously, in '78, Scotty wouldn't have been in the pubs; he'd have been too young then. So,
two great halfbacks, Phil Kaplan and Tommy Renonicus.
We swapped the tactical hints.
You got slightly more medals, though, so more caps.
Yeah, we've done a lot of fighting in our career, both of us, clearly.
I'm sure you would have gone on and started slapping his face, Western Suburbs.
Could I have your autograph, please?
On that bombshell, I think we're done, aren't we? We're done. I didn't even introduce the podcast this week. We just went straight into it because it's not what we do. This is not professionalism. If you want professionalism, go listen to the Super Leagues podcast. They're higher in the charts than us and all them other ones. But we should get Stuart Pearce on one week because he likes rugby league.
Speaks very well.
Yeah. You should get some agents that you can fawn over, Rich. Seems to go down well.
We went down that route before. We're not doing it again.
Oh, what a shame.
I know. There's only one agent I like, and he never talks about his agency, which is
men in suits, Bill. Rich men in suits.
Well, I mean, as you say that, coming up in a few weeks' time, we will have a man in a suit on the programme. I don't know if he'll be wearing a suit, but he will be on the programme. And as a little hint as to who it is, he once interviewed me for a job and didn't give me it. So there's a clue to the people out there. So find out who that is in a few weeks' time. He won't remember that. John, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it as ever. Who's on By the Balls this week? Do you know? Because I know you'll have about 3 million of episodes of that lined up.
No, I've got no one lined up at the moment, but the Paul Aiken one is there, CEO of Hull KR. He's a really interesting guy, Paul. I think if you're a Hull KR fan, definite must listen. He's got some very interesting plans for the future of the club, and I think it's in good hands, so go and check that one out.
And my Fridays wouldn't be the same without Steve not being able to connect with you on Zoom. They would not be the same. So never teach him how to use it because I can't beat the. I can't hear John. Where is he? There's a big delay. I do Steve's voice, obviously.
BT song.
Send the podcast with a long gap. Then John says, "Hi, Steve." John, thank you. Phil, thank you as ever.
Pleasure.
Enjoy the week in rugby league because we certainly will do now that it's in full swing.